So there are a ton of different ways that you can take inspiration for a build. For me, a lot of times it's going to be something IRL. It's going to be, well, from movies like I did with the Kung Fu Panda build very recently, or from a show, and kind of anything in between. But there's something about video games that it just hits different. So naturally, we're going to go dip our toes back into the world of video games, to Nintendo, and to a classic that I think is, well, very underrated. Hey Terraria fans, what is going on? Welcome back to another speed build video. Guys, in this one, I'm going to be going all the way back to some emulator classics because I never owned a Super Nintendo, but we're going to be going back to a Metroid, and not just any Metroid, but Super Metroid. Now, personally, I think Metroid is a criminally underrated series for a lot of people. Not everyone's really played them, and Super Metroid was an absolute freaking classic. I love that game. Granted, I played it on emulators, but that's not the point. They also came out with Metroid Prime and a few other ones, but I don't know. I just feel like the series was never really talked about that much. So I've been thinking about building the ship for Samus at the beginning of the game for a very long time, and I just finally decided to do it. And again, this ship is iconic, so I was trying to do my absolute best to really make this look the way it should. It was pretty tricky. There's a lot of different components here in terms of just the shape and the design, and well, you'll see. All that said, guys, before we hop into the build, one last thing is that I will be covering all of the materials that I do use in this build at the end of the video. So, a lot of people do want to try to make replicas of builds or exact copies. So if you do want to do that, it's all listed out there for you. Please take a look and use it to, well, whatever desire that you see fit. All right, with that said, guys, let us get to this iconic Nintendo build, shall we? Alrighty guys, so here we are in the build, and of course we're going to be using a ton of copper plating. Now, the copper plating itself is already orange, which is great, but I am going to be putting a coat of deep orange on this to really make it stand out. So I'm really just trying to figure out the shapes and designs, especially around the visor area. Now you will see I'm using a little bit of a luminite variant. This is the cryo ore, or whatever that blue one is. It doesn't really matter here which one you use. I also then decided to use some iron bricks as well. The goal here is really to sort of generally frame out the shape of the ship. It's not as easy a shape as I would have thought. It's got some rounded edges. It needs some depth, some gaps, and some other stuff. So it actually did take me quite some time just to figure out this right side of the design, using meteorite brick and other things just to sort of label everything here. It's not as easy as I thought it would be. Again, I did have a reference photo and was trying to use that, but ultimately once we came up with the first shape, things began to go a little bit more smoothly. I started to sort of delineate everything where I'm going to put some background walls here by using, just a layer of the slab wall, or slab block, I should say. This is really helpful just for my eyes to sort of figure out where I'm going to be putting things. And now you can start to see I'm starting to put some sort of, just some venting and some other things within the ship, and just trying to add little details as I go. There I'm going to be using, that time to figure out what is it that I want to actually put together. And I'm going to slowly repeat this as I go, eventually coming up with a rough design and shape that actually, well, sort of looks like the original design. Of course, once we're done with these side sections here, I try to move to these kind of shoulder pauldron type looking things. Again, the whole ship does look a little bit like Samus. I think that's totally by design. It's kind of a cool shape overall, but it is very unique and very recognizable. So I'm using a lot of different blocks just to sort of separate things out and let my eyes sort of, again, visually see where I'm going to put details. You can see, yeah, it's a pretty big build. There's a lot going on. We're using a lot of the same blocks and just pieces. I wanted to fill different areas like the center here with luminite and then make it stand out. So what I actually did was then fill the middle section with some meteorite brick. When it comes to the bottom, guys, the bottom of this build is a little tricky. I use a lot of cog painted black. This is just to kind of delineate once again. And then I try to do the shaping with some cog wall, or some cog blocks, I should say, again, and using different materials to kind of just separate everything out. It was really important to keep some edges on this clean and then figure out how I was going to do the thrusters. Now, the thrusters is a kind of mixed bag of crimtane blocks. They are not my favorite initially, but I think they kind of grew on me near the end. I also wanted to replace some of these areas and just give them a little bit more of a dark texture. So again, you can use anything here, any dark wall that you want. I believe I used different varieties initially and landed on one that I liked. I can't remember if this was going to be a final product necessarily, but as I kept going, you kind of have that kind of rubberized texture that I think looks really, really nice. Of course, you can swap these out for pretty much anything that you like. Personally, I don't think there's a right choice here. It's just whatever sort of floats your boat and whatever you think is going to fit. Now, again, I'm going to be trying to work this into the face as well, because this is going to outline the eyes and this sort of visor look where we are just using a little bit of emerald gem spark. Now, I try to section this off with other gem spark options and just kind of give it some lines and some features. I think this actually worked really nicely. So you could use any other one so long as you paint them green, which is what I did. And the visor ended up looking really, really nice. For the bottom, we went with some red gem spark to kind of give us a bit more of a thruster look and a little bit more of a mechanical look that we'll add a little bit later. So overall, guys, this design is pretty complex. I don't anticipate people are going to find this one too easy. Luckily, you have a very easy reference photo that you can pick if you just type in Samus's ship. I'm going to be adding a ton of mechanical bits here that are kind of just a smorgasbord of things I can think of and try to make it look really nice and add some lines and kind of just separate features in and out. So I'm not going to bore you with absolutely every detail. Hopefully this gives you a better understanding of what I was thinking while I was going through this. And if you have any questions about anything that's really kind of complex, do let me know in the comments down below. So that said, guys, I'll shut up now. Please enjoy the rest of this build, and we will see you at the end of this section. Alrighty guys, so as promised at the beginning of this video, I'm gonna go ahead and quickly cover all of the materials that I used for this build. Now, as you can imagine, there's gonna be a ton of different metallic type builds, but if you wanna take a quick look here or a quick pause to get a closer look, by all means guys, feel free to do that right now. Good? Okay, good. So let's go ahead and cover all of the materials. Now, again, wall-wise, guys, there aren't actually all that many. It's a lot of different gem sparks, some obviously that stand out a little bit more than others, but you have some amber gem spark, some emerald gem spark, and some ruby gem spark. The ruby gem spark is of course in the thrusters. The emerald gem spark is for the main window or visor looking thing. And then the amber gem spark is thrown throughout the build wherever I needed a little additional light. Now, while these stand out, the one that's probably the most unique for me is going to be the granite wall. I don't typically use this, but when I painted it the black color, it had a kind of rubberized look that I thought looked really good for this design. So that's mainly on the bottom section and also around the edges of the visor. I think it adds that texture, adds that feel, and I'm really glad I actually decided to use this. Otherwise, unsurprisingly, the bulk of the build is copper plating wall, as well as some luminite brick wall and some cog. And then we used a bit of platinum brick wall and some stone slab wall in a few spots as well. For edging on the sides here, guys, where it looked rounded, we also used the silly green balloon wall, which we then painted a deep orange. And then we even used a tiny bit of Titan stone along the bottom section as well. So again, not too many walls and really nothing that's super crazy. It's a pretty limited selection of wall types, and hopefully, despite the thing looking very complex, it's not actually as bad as you think. So moving on to the blocks, guys, we're of course going to have a lot of metallic blocks as well. So you're going to have your copper plating, you're going to have your cryocore brick, as well as aluminite. I think the one that maybe is the most unique is the crimtane brick. I use this sparingly, but it does look pretty good as a bit of a separator in some spots. And because we painted it orange, it looks pretty interesting. So something that I may use a little more in the future for these kinds of things, but really a good fit for this particular design. And beyond that, of course, we're using cog, palladium, and some ruby gem spark blocks in a couple spots. Nothing too crazy. The stone accent slab is a good sort of thing to put in if you want to sort of delineate certain areas. I didn't use it too much, but it does stand out wherever it's actually put down. And I think it's a nice choice, although maybe we could have used something a little bit different. And then finally, we used a bunch of conveyor belts just to add some movement and I guess some roundness to the design. So again, guys, not a ton of blocks. They're just a little bit different and maybe not ones that you're super familiar with, but this should give you a really good idea of what you might need if you want to make something similar in the future. Now finally guys, paints, as you can see, we really didn't use a lot of paints. It's a really straightforward palette. We used some shadow paint, some green paint, some deep orange paint, and some black paint. Now, when it comes to paints, guys, the palette is actually really simple. As I said, we used a lot of deep orange, and we of course use a lot of black. We use a little bit of gray, and we use some green, and we use some shadow paint. So only 5 paints for this entire build is pretty crazy when you think about it. I think sometimes people think you need like 40 different paints or something, but no, we used 5. They look great. I'm really actually pretty surprised that I didn't end up using more in some capacity. But yeah, that covers all the materials for this build, guys. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more insight. And with that said, guys, let's go ahead and move on with the rest of the video. All right, guys, so there you go. There is the iconic Metroid ship done. And I gotta say, this thing looks really good, all things considered. Now, I say all things considered because, quite frankly, the beginning of the build phase was not great. It took me a long time to actually get that right side of the build sorted. It was something to do with the proportions and just the shape and the roundedness. It wasn't there, and it was driving me absolutely crazy. But once we got past that little hurdle, we actually had a build that was starting to come together pretty quickly. And overall, guys, once I got the ball rolling, I really started to see the design come together. Now, of course, we did have to hit some of those iconic features, which was not easy, but once we got to them, I really liked the way that they looked. So I am glad I spent some time on the glass, or the sort of visor looking thing. It does obviously remind you of Samus's mask. I think that's by design. And then the bottom side of the build, where we have these sort of engines or thrusters, that was tricky initially, but once I got the shape and the design and the feel, I think it really came together really quickly. I actually went back and made it very mechanical, very heavy. There's a lot of just mechanical bits of movement. That's not something you necessarily need to do. I just went down that road because I thought it would make it look a little bit more visually interesting. Finally, you can see a couple of additional details that I went and added. So there's a couple of exhausts and venting that I put throughout the actual design. If not, I just felt like it would have looked like a big orange metal blob floating in the sky, which we're of course trying to avoid. But yeah, ultimately, I got nothing really bad to say about this build. I really liked the way it came out, the proportions, the shape, the colors, just everything. So again, let me know what you think in the comments down below, guys. What did you like? What did you maybe not like? Would you even give this an attempt in your own world or in the future? Because I am all game to see it. I don't know how others would put this thing together, but I would be very curious to see. Anyways, guys, with all that said and another epic build out of the way, I just want to say thank you so much for watching until the end of this video. And as always, thumbs if you liked it, subs if you loved it. We will see you in the next one.